big news or so-called news is that the U.S. corporation appears to have kicked the can down the road yet again and reached some sort of deal on this so-called debt ceiling. I did some investigation to find out what's going on here, and there's two dimensions to this story. The first is that they were able to, I talked to the Dragon family, the Asian elders, and they said that they were able to convince a Taiwanese member of the Dragon family to sign documents that allowed the Federal Reserve Board to access uncounted trillions of dollars, or so-called dollars. This was not sanctioned by the Dragon family as a whole, and it turns out that the person who did this was double-crossed. They did not get the kickbacks they were promised. The other thing, that the reason that person was fooled is they trotted out a so-called King Charles, and they promised that the money would be used for these big humanitarian projects. But as soon as they got the necessary documentation to put money into the financial system computers, they absconded with it, and they didn't keep their promises. I don't know if you've watched or read the cartoon series Little People, or Peanuts as it's known, where Lucy holds the football for Charlie Brown, and she promises this time she won't take it away. And each time he's fooled and he ends up falling on the ground. These people are not to be trusted. They are liars, and they are criminals, and they think of people who are not part of their family mafia as people to be killed, exploited, whatever. And they will break promises at the blink of an eye. So it was a dumb move. I heard that something is going to be done to counteract this, and that this will not go through. We'll see. There's still, the battle is not over yet, but that's the one aspect. The other point is this, is that the whole idea of having, people like the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds negotiating with Asian elders. Apparently, Marcos in the Philippines has also been shipping lots of gold out to these people. In any case, that's one aspect to the story. But the other one is that the whole idea of a privately owned banking cartel, issuing debt to the government and the government being forced to pay them itself is against the Constitution. The U.S. Constitution says the power to create money belongs to Congress. So basically, at the level of the people who own the Federal Reserve Boards, we have these Asian families who mean well but keep getting fooled. And at the other levels, that they shouldn't. This power to create money should belong to the U.S. Congress, not to these families, be they Asian or Western. So the whole thing is a charade, and they're kicking the can down the road again. But it's not going to continue. We're going to have to take kinetic action. This is going to be a military operation. We cannot trust these people. We cannot expect them to just suddenly hand things over. It's going to have to be done physically and kinetically. And we know who these people are, and we know that they don't control the U.S. military. The spokesperson for the Chinese defense ministry even said so. They said that the Chinese defense minister is not going to meet so-called Defense Minister Lloyd Austin at this big meeting they're having in Singapore, because he is not in charge of the U.S. Armed Forces. He does not control the nuclear weapons. He is just part of this show that's controlled by corporations, including their media and their little fake outlets like AP. But they are really a shrinking circle, as you probably percent of Americans now think the media is truly an enemy of the people. That's astounding. And everybody knows the whole Biden thing is fake. This cannot go on. They're pretending that they're going to create money out of nothing. Is just a con job, okay? If they take a computer and they put $1 trillion in that computer, then they go out and they use that fake money to steal real money, real work, real resources from the American people. So it's a con job. it has to be ended, or the United States will continue degenerating as it has been for quite a while now into lawlessness and incredible gap between the rich and the poor. It's not going to be allowed to continue. This is not over yet. There's a lot of things I cannot talk about, but there are meetings coming up, and it's going to require physical action. Now, speaking about physical action, we also note that there's been a big change in the Ukraine. The Ukrainian prosecutor's office, the Ukrainian government, is now filing war crimes charges against Vladimir Zelensky. In other words, they are aware now that he's been involved actively in the slaughter of tens of thousands of Ukrainian men, and he cannot return to the Ukraine. He will be killed. And the same with the head of Wagner. He's now, been identified as a mass murderer. Now, the other person the Russians need to deal with is Dmitry Medvedev, okay, because he is a high-level Khazarian mafia agent within the Russian power structure. You can tell that when he says, for example, everybody in the Ukraine is a terrorist, and terrorists have no human rights. We can kill them. He's calling for mass slaughter by using the terrorist label. Sort of reminds me of George Bush Jr., if you're a terrorist, you got no human rights, and we can kill you, but there's no actual definition of what a terrorist is. So anybody they call a terrorist, they can kill. It goes back to before the Magna Carta. This is the kind of people we're dealing with. They are slavers, they are mass murderers, and they have to be put down like rabid dogs. Now, we're also getting, now reports that the U.S. government has been paying $18,000 a head for children from Latin America. And they're bringing them in unaccompanied into the United States, and at least 85,000 of these children have disappeared, and a lot of others have been placed in abusive foster homes. That's what they do with the money they're getting, okay? They're using that money to buy children to torture, okay, or rape. This is fact. This is real. These people cannot be left to keep doing business as usual. Another thing I've noticed is that they have this big story about China bringing fentanyl into the United States via Mexico. The Chinese embassy in Mexico just came out and said no. The precursors for the fentanyl are coming from the EU, and they're being put together as fentanyl in Mexico, but it's not a Chinese thing, and it's only part of the Mexican cartels who are involved in this. This is not, again, so we have drug smuggling, human smuggling criminals who have hijacked the U.S. government and the Canadian government. This is a fact. It's provable in any court of law if the court of laws actually function according to the law. But that would involve removing a lot of compromised judges before that's possible. That's why it's going to have to be the military. No one else has the capability to clean this mess up, and it's going to happen. I guarantee you. The other thing we've noticed, of course, is Turkey. President Erdogan, or apparently a younger avatar, has been put in power, but we're hearing that even though there were headlines in the New York Times about how he was going to be all friendly with Biden, it ain't the case. The Turkish people are so angry and so pissed off at what the Americans have done that, just putting an avatar at the top is not going to change the situation. This is the same with Mexico. It's the same with, Belarus. They tried to, they killed President Lukashenko with an energy weapon and tried to replace him with an avatar who was then going to supposedly launch nuclear weapons at the EU and the United States and try to start this Armageddon they're trying. But this puppet was taken away, and that's not going to happen. Now, the other thing that's happening is the Serbian Christians are preparing to send their army into Kosovo, which has been a major center for the human and drug smuggling, coming out of the Ukraine, and they're going to go take that criminal enclave down. God bless them for that. The other thing we notice is that the last variant of the so-called COVID-19 was Omicron, and they stopped having new variants after that because the Russians took down the laboratory in the Ukraine that was spreading these bioweapons. So that's why the pandemic ended. So in any case, it looks like we're going to have to fight our way through this. We're hoping that the whole thing will just bankrupt and then there would be a kind of a Chapter 11 thing, but it's not going to be that easy. And a lot of what we have to do, I cannot talk about publicly because we don't want to tip our hand, but it's going to require more military action. A lot of it's already taken place. A lot of people have been removed, but we've got to end this show decisively, and it will happen. But I think it will probably take a few months. The other thing we need to worry about is that we're headed for the summer solstice, which is a typical time for satanic fire practices, and the Russians are saying they're planning some sort of horrific Fukushima type event. We all have to be on guard. But if it happens, remember who did it and target those people. Don't blame it on nature or anything else. In any case, they are going to lose. It's a mathematical certainty. They're corrupt. The United States corporation is bankrupt. It cannot continue. They can't. They bought a bit of time. Maybe we'll see when next week if they can still pay their bills or not. I'm hoping the Dragon family will come through and cut off this money that came from Taiwan and force the plug to be pulled on this whole thing. Let's see. All right. Well, that's what I have to say for myself. Now I'd like to answer questions from readers and viewers.
Hi, Ben. We have our first question for today. You mentioned that in Bakhmut, the Wagner group was actually working with Ukraine to deliberately kill men and boys. You mentioned that the Russian army is not involved in this battle. If Russia then did not invade Ukraine, who destroyed the 46 biological laboratories and are bombing strategic ammo dumps in other places in Ukraine? Can you please explain this in more detail?
I didn't say the Russians did not. Okay, first of all, I don't want to use the phrase invade Ukraine because if you look at the international law, if you look at the United Nations, you'll realize that Ukraine's borders were never actually registered with any international body. And what happened was the traditionally Russian-speaking, ethnically Russian part of Ukraine on the Russian side of the Dnieper River wanted to join their own people in Russia. But Russian special forces did go in to these biolabs and shut them down in all parts of the Ukraine. And this was a police operation against mass murderers. So the Russians army did go into the Russian ethnic part of the Ukraine, but the specific area of Bakhmut, what was going on there was a private military contractor by the name of Wagner that used prisoners, criminals taken from jails to murder Ukrainians. They were dying within 4 hours, and they're dying at a ratio of 8-1 compared to the Russians. Any real military leader would not let his troops die at a ratio of 8-1 against a numerically superior enemy. This is not military. So the only way they could be dying within 4 hours of being sent there is that someone was giving them the coordinates. And the Washington Post briefly published and then redacted an interview where they said they had documents showing that Zelensky and his people were in communications with the Wagner people in that area. So, and then I asked the Russian FSB, and they said yes. Prigozhin, Wagner, and Zelensky both work for the Khazarian mafia. They don't work for the Russians. They don't work for the Russian Orthodox Church. This was a Khazarian mafia genocidal operation aimed at creating slaves, enslaving Ukrainian women and children for sale in the international slave market. That's what's really going on there. This is not about Russia liberating its own ethnic people who were being killed. And it's not about Russian special forces shutting down chemical or biological warfare laboratories that were running against international law. Okay, next question.
Ben, what happens to the worldwide arrests? Why aren't they making moves? I'm starting to think that your sources are lying to you to keep us in a state of hopium.
I have that same question. I keep getting told that people are being arrested, and yet, and a lot of people did disappear. Let's not forget that the entire Bush family was executed, and people like Nancy Pelosi have been removed. So it's not like nothing is happening, but for sure, we still have this horrendous Biden show run out on on the corporate media, uh, and so clearly not enough has happened yet, and I've become very skeptical of reports of arrests. And the other thing I found that we need to understand is that uh, they really do kill people. Like George Soros was killed by people, under the orders of Dick Cheney, uh, and he was killed. But then they went ahead and they produced computer graphics and fake articles that were supposedly written by Soros. So even if you arrest or kill these people, they still use their corporate media to, pretend that they weren't, and then put out these avatars. So the point being is that even if, like, they killed the actor who was playing Biden at the Bali summit in November, but then they just found another actor. So what we need to do is to make sure that not that they don't have the ability to project these avatars anymore. And that means going after the puppet masters, people like Henry Kissinger, David Rockefeller Jr., all these people. They are the ones who need to be hunted down to end this show. They're mass murdering criminals. They legally need to be arrested. And when that happens, we'll all be able to see it. But right now, I agree with you that these arrests haven't been enough, and it ain't over yet. But we have to keep fighting. Next question.
What mechanism or what country's military is likely to clean out Switzerland's Octagon Group and all the Chabad banking entities? Russia could presumably, but obviously hasn't. Why not?
I think they're waiting for the overall situation to calm down. I think they will go in if they have to, but I think it could also be U.S. and British special forces who could go into that underground network there and around the BIS and Zurich and stuff. But right now, it hasn't happened. However, there are definite reports that the BIS has run out of gold. We saw Credit Suisse collapse, and Credit Suisse was, the gold place for the Western Europe, and now they're gone. So something is happening. I think it's happening at a special forces level, and it's happening at a hybrid level. And also, the Swiss people are very independent-minded, and they really do believe in democracy. And I believe the Swiss are actually taking the lead in cleaning up their own country. And God bless them for doing so. But again, it's still not over because you still see this horror show, on their corporate media every day with people like Zelensky being paraded out as if they're heroes when in fact they are war criminals. So clearly a lot more has to be done. But I think at the end of the day, it'll be white hats in both the Anglo-Saxon and the Russian military who will clean up the Octagon Group. Next question.
Hi, Ben. I'm wondering if, as you say in this video, you were unable to trade US dollars at your Japanese bank for yen, how are the US soldiers in all our military bases, such as Japan, Argentina, and all these other locations around the world, being paid? How is our military being able to pay for things in their local economies just outside the military bases? And now we are entering summer traveling season. Will Americans be able to use their US dollars to buy things in places that are rejecting the US dollar?
Well, As far as the U.S. military is concerned, I've heard that they've got their own dollar printing press and that they have reached a deal with the Asians, um, that they will become like a sort of planetary protection force. So the U.S. military apparently had, and this is not the clowns under Lloyd Austin and all those people. I'm talking about the real U.S. military. They have their own dollar printing machine, and that is being accepted right now. As far as Americans traveling overseas, all I know is that the cash dollars I had, I could not use in Japan. But I know that there are dollars that you can take abroad and use. I don't know the details, but it depends on the serial number on the dollars. But uh, if people want to, they can try, bringing cash and seeing what happens. But right now, it seems to be that the credit cards are working, and that's because they're part of the quantum financial system and they're asset backed. And but as far as cash dollars, I'd like to hear back from people who try to cash them different places. Let's find out what the story is there. And the other thing is that we're talking about big things like buying oil from Saudi Arabia and Iraq and Venezuela. This is what they cannot do with their new fake money. This is why they're breaking up the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. They said they started refilling it in February. Now they said it's in June. Uh, Basically, they can't use their credit card to buy gas and oil. That's for sure. We'll see. But clearly, it's a cat and mouse game or a whack-a-mole game where they find different ways to sort of launder this stuff. So it's not a clear-cut thing, but clearly there is an ongoing attempt to quarantine this money. Next question.
We have our last question for today. How will the controlled transition happen in Europe? From what I understand, in the US and Canada, it will most likely happen using martial law, as well as disclosure and economic reset. In Europe, will it go down similarly?
I think when you see the replacement of phony leaders like Macron and Scholz, uh, then then you see a new security agreement for Europe that includes Russia. In other words, have Russia join NATO, then you'll see it. But I think right now Europe cannot defend itself against Russia. If Russia wanted to, they could be in France within a matter of weeks. And the American military is not going to fight to defend Khazarian mafia-controlled puppets in Europe. They're not going to fight Russia for that. But I understand that under the table or a deal has been reached, and that the Dnieper River will be the sort of secret zone of Russian and German influence in Western Europe. So the bottom line is you need to look for the announcement of a new security arrangement, and we're seeing leaders like Macron and others call for that in public. So look for that. Look for a new security treaty for Europe that involves Russia. When you see that being announced, you'll know the transition has been completed. Okay, well, I look forward to talking to you next week, and let's see if the Asian dragons get their act together and cut off the U.S. corporation next week or not.